Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is David Shive, the Chief Information Officer for the General Services Administration. David, thanks again for taking the time to speak with me. There's plenty to talk about here. I think a good way to get the conversation started here would just be better understanding some of the key pillars of GSA's modernization strategy. What are they, and how does the cloud ultimately enable those IT modernization goals?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jory, and thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to the conversation all day long. No, that's a really good question. Most people, when they think about GSA or talk about GSA, they think, well, haven't they already modernized their IT infrastructure? And to a certain degree, that's accurate. But anybody who's been in IT for any amount of time understands that modernization done well is a continuous improvement, continuous iteration type of activity. Our mission hasn't changed, but the way we deliver IT against the mission continues to change and iterate. Our mission, we have to deliver value and savings in real estate and acquisition and technology and other support services, supporting our federal partners, our federal agency partners across the enterprise. But one of the things that we've done is use technology as a way to do that better, faster, stronger, and more. And when we did our digital transformations years ago, we focused on the business mission of GSA, which was largely analog at the time, and converted it into a digital process. And we saw some really, really great outcomes there. The latest iteration of our modernization strategy is a version 2.0 of that thing. We're doing our second wave of digital transformation that looks at not only are we dealing with digital assets in the ecosystem, in the businesses of GSA, whether that's design and construction or real estate management or acquisition or technology enablement. But are we doing it as a digital thing through the entire ecosystem, the entire life cycle of whatever thing we're doing, whether it's a transaction or workflow or something like that? And that takes a refactoring of the entire way we do our business. And it's a marriage of business process reengineering, using new and enabled technology, having an API-rich background that allows us to stay connected between not only work processes, but the underlying business and data processes underneath to get the best 21st century business outcomes. And we're focused in 5 main areas to do this. One, we're keeping mission at the very forefront of what we do. Our mission as an IT shop is to support the business mission of GSA. And so we need to make sure that we maintain the strong partnerships with our business so we're close to what their needs are now. So we know what their emerging needs are and what we can anticipate their needs are going to be in the future. And that way we can know, if we know the business of acquisition, if we know the business of property management, if we know the business of delivering technology, we can know what our partners are going to need in the future. Another area is on strengthening cybersecurity. We have to remain wary and good at facing the adversaries of the United States and providing the defenses against those adversaries that are going to safeguard the computing assets and the data assets of the federal government, of GSA, and the partners that we serve. So we'll continue to focus time and attention there. We'll continue to strive for operational excellence. We've taken pride in delivering strong and quality IT products for a long time, but we also have the practical realities of the citizens we serve expect us to do more with less. They expect us to do well, and they expect us to be able to measure that. So we're constantly looking for ways to become more efficient, to deliver tech more effectively and more efficiently at a lower cost and at a higher value. As GSA grows organically as a business, as more agencies come and ask us to do business, we don't want to have to grow IT at the same rate. We want to be able to grow in response to that, but we also want to do so in an efficient and effective way. And then the last way is, we have a pretty long-standing history of being an innovation leader. All the way back in the 90s, we were the first agency to have the internet on every desktop. We were the first agency to move, mail and collaboration out to the cloud and stuff like that. We take that role as an innovation leader very seriously. Some might ask us, why GSA? We're a bunch of purchasing agents and property managers. But we're small enough that we can be nimble and quick and try things out on ourselves. We're big enough that when we do something and we get success, it will likely scale to other agencies as well. And then we are also a direct technology provider through our technology transformation service, through ITS and the Federal Acquisition Service, places like that. And we want to be able to say to our federal community partners, we're not going to sell to you or provide for you what we haven't tried ourselves, tried out on ourselves first, and determined that it works and works at scale. So we'll continue to focus time and attention in the classic OKR model where 15, 20% of our time is focused on what's the next innovative thing that we should be focusing on so we can try it on ourselves and then scale across government.
Excellent. And of course, everything that we're talking about here comes with that twofold focus, I think. GSA, of course, being a hub and facilitator for the rest of the federal government, but also GSA acknowledging its own internal needs, making sure its own employees, have that support as well. And so I think that's actually a great segue to the next point here of just really looking under the hood at the cloud infrastructure and how it currently supports GSA's mission. What ultimately does GSA need from its IT infrastructure and its cloud infrastructure in order to support public-facing services?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, Jory. So cloud isn't new to GSA. We've been doing it for a while. And one of the things that we learned early and often is that cloud done poorly looks a lot like doing on-prem IT very poorly. And when we looked at our on-prem workloads and said, we're going to shift those things to the cloud, we took the opportunity to not only rationalize those things, but also optimize them so that we're doing good practice and best practice in the cloud. But the cloud of today is very different than the cloud of 5 or 6 years ago. And that's a good thing. That means IT overall is iterating to better outcomes. Right now, I'll give you some numbers. Cloud supports the agency mission in that it represents 53 or 54% of our workloads. Another 21 or 22% of our workloads are off-prem in managed service places. So 74 or so percent of our workloads are off-site. So that's kind of from a numbers perspective where we are. The way that it directly impacts our mission is that we are increasingly able to do the work of GSA as well as serve our agency partners from any location on any time and on any device. We are able to scale up and build for the baseline level operating posture that you need instead of having to build for peak utilization, because the cloud allows us to elegantly peak at times, and we only pay for those peak periods. So we're architecting for standard operating posture rather than peak posture. That's a money saver. That's an efficiency builder as well. We are able to build our workloads. This is a difference now than when we first did cloud. We're able to build our workloads so that they're highly portable, and we can move from cloud to cloud or cloud to on-prem and then back out to cloud as it occurs to us and as is useful to us. And that helps us be somewhat cloud agnostic and technology agnostic, and allows us to not only search for best price, but yes, best usability as well. Not all clouds are equal, and nor should they be. And we're able to shape our workloads to be portable enough to move in and out. And then I think one of the last kind of big changes is we've architected some portability and pluggability into our cloud platforms. And so that we are able to take those workloads and plug them in and out of not only the best cloud, but the best components that sit in those clouds. We're able to plug them in and out because the capabilities of cloud and the capabilities that cloud service providers are leapfrogging themselves on a rapid cycle every 3 or 6 months. And so we leave ourselves some elegant ways to be able to introduce those new capabilities in a very rapid way. What this does is it allows our businesses to focus all of their time and attention on making their business the best possible thing it can be. It's removing the limits that technology provides on iterating and changing the business. It's made the agency overall be much more agile and flexible than it typically could be. The notion that the government is this large, slow behemoth moving at a glacial pace and far behind the commercial world in agility and business is a misnomer. It's no longer a reality. GSA is able to operate at the speed of 21st century business, and cloud is one of the key enablers for making that happen.
Excellent. Love to hear the cloud and delivering on all the promises of flexibility and scalability and resiliency. I think are kind of the real key points there. Zooming out here a little bit, recognizing, of course, the past year and a half now has been a challenging operating environment for all of government, all organizations really, in trying to look at that continuity of operations. And with that in mind, how has the pandemic really affected GSA's workforce, acknowledging that yes, cloud's not a new thing. The innovation piece has always been at the core of GSA, but even with that in mind, are there situations in which the pandemic has changed the pace or urgency of some things in that IT modernization portfolio?
Yeah. Sure, it has. We were fortunate. It's a tough word to use, but I think it's the best word. We were fortunate as we entered the pandemic that we had made investments in people and process and time and money to fully mobile enable the agency, to move to the cloud, to have the inherent scalability and flexibility and agility, so that when something as terrible as the pandemic happened, when the national emergency started, we were able to pretty seamlessly continue the business mission of GSA in total. And that's why you make those investments. And you hope to never have to realize that total value. You hope that something calamitous like that never happens. But when it does, it's confirmation that you made some good choices back then. The pandemic affected our workforce just like any workforce out in the commercial space or in their personal lives, stuff like that. People were deeply troubled by what was going on, and they were impacted by their family members. They're impacted by their kids coming home and having to homeschool them. They're impacted by elder care in ways that they normally didn't have to. They're impacted by the fact that they're stuck at home. But one of the things that we found at GSA is that work to mobile enable the agency made it so that we could continue the entire business mission portfolio of GSA. And that was deeply satisfying on some levels, but it also revealed some gaps in what we did. We had to do some tuning and tweaking of our systems to get the best possible outcomes there when 100% of our workforce was outside of the buildings of GSA. But what we found is that because we had made the investment in good tech and good business process to work in a mobile enabled way, we were able to focus our time and attention on our employees, which is the place right where it needed to be. We found that while as an agency, we were mobile enabled and ready for this, not everybody had availed themselves of that benefit. Some people, they like going into the office. Lots of people actually like going into the office. They like the camaraderie. They like the connectedness and the ability to collaborate in real time. So we found that we had to pour time and attention into those employees who, even though they were mobile enabled, they'd never really been mobile. We found that that population, we had to make sure that we not only talked about the complexities of working in a mobile environment that we talked about, but we talked about it in plain language to increase the value of the communications that were necessary to turn out the workforce. We found as people started to come back into the office slowly, or where the mission demanded that people be in the office. Remember, we're the largest property manager in the world. We manage the portfolio of buildings, and some of that requires hands-on. We found that we had to make sure that our tools were tuned and tweaked to work in that hybrid environment almost from day one. So we've had a lot of time to really be thinking about, okay, as people start to come back into facilities, whenever that happens, what's that hybrid environment going to look like? We found some gaps where it's not working as well as we should, and we spent a lot of time thinking about what that should look like and how we should fill those gaps. We've also found that the pace and urgency, to go to your specifically to your question, that the federal government as a whole and GSA specifically is able to modernize much more quickly than anybody thought before. There's nothing like a crisis to really focus people's minds, and we found that this government is as good as anybody, as good as the best in the commercial world, at reacting and responding to emergency. And that when we are all have a singular focus, trying to focus on making the best possible environment for our employees to work, to do the business mission of the federal government, that we indeed can get that done. And I'm hopeful, in my role as CIO and my role as the vice chair of the Federal CIO Council, working with Claire Martirana, the chair of the council, that we can sustain some of that velocity increase. We don't want to wear people out because you can't sprint indefinitely, but we're looking for some ways to try to sustain that increase in velocity, because we know we can do it. This government can be agile. It can pivot on a dime it needs to.
Hearing all of that, I think that leads me to a little bit of a detour, I guess, which is, of course, the culture change piece of things. An IT problem is never just an IT problem. In some ways, the technology is the easiest thing to do because you can, of course, put in the new tech, you can implement the new hardware, you can implement the new software, but getting people to feel comfortable with it, that's where things get squishy and it gets, ambiguous, and it takes a different approach, certainly, to make sure that everyone's on board with that. Case in point with, like you said, just because the telework and the infrastructure is there, doesn't mean that everyone has a baseline comfortability with it. And so, if we could just maybe, unpack that a little bit more, how do you navigate something as tricky, but at the same time vital as that culture change in a time like this?
So that's a good question. A lot of good questions, Jory. I've been doing IT for a long time now. I'm going to date myself. I started back in the late 80s, and it's changed pretty dramatically. Back when I first started, technology projects failed due to poor technology all the time. They failed because you would try to do something and it just didn't work. That doesn't really happen anymore. Technology projects rarely fail because the tech doesn't work as designed. They usually fail because of poor organizational change management practice, not prepping the end users, not prepping the organizations and institutions who are using the technology to avail themselves effectively of the value of whatever new technology that you're implementing. I can draw a straight line back to any of the successes that GSA IT has as being the IT shop for GSA, to the fact that we pour an inordinate amount of time into organizational change management, but it doesn't just start there. It starts with design thinking at the very beginning, which includes inviting and introducing your business partners into the very beginning of anything you try to do. Heck, to be honest, we here in GSA IT, we don't really do IT for the sake of IT. We do it in support of the business of GSA. And what that means is when the businesses of GSA have some problem that they're trying to solve, they invite the techies into the room to help them design the solutions. Sometimes that's technology, sometimes it's not, to fix the problem. And when you have that design thinking baked in from the very beginning, it really buffers the risks associated with poor organizational change management. But then you have to do some classic things as well. You have to, as you're delivering the thing, make sure you never do the classic waterfall delivery where you work a long time and then deliver and then hope and pray that it was what the customer asked for. Instead, using DevSecOps and Agile, you're working hand in hand with the business customer, delivering in small incremental manageable bites on a very rapid basis, whether it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks or something like that, so that one, the business can say, that's not really what I wanted, and you're only 2 weeks off instead of 6 months or 12 months off. But also the business, remember I mentioned the rapid pace of business change here in the 21st century, business priorities are shifting right out under us all the time. As those business priorities shift, you're shifting right alongside them. What you deliver, what you expect to deliver at year 5 sometimes is very different than what was analyzed at the beginning of the program, but that's okay because you never separated yourself from what the business needs and what they're going to need in the future because you're working super close together.
Yeah, it's never IT for IT's sake. I think that's a great, mantra for not just GSA, but across the federal government. That's the whole message that should really come across. So we've talked about the people, we've talked about the IT. I think the other big component here is the data, and I think the cloud is really a big picture of that. From a platform and from an infrastructure perspective, you can, at least on paper, have a bigger enterprise-wide view of all the data. You can get all those insights across the enterprise. How does the cloud enable GSA to get better access to its data? And how does that better access to the data then in turn enable better customer service, better digital services?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably we could spend a couple of hours on that one alone. This is not necessarily a cloud specific response. This is a good IT response, and cloud is a part of good IT, but the response will be extensible to on-prem as well as cloud. So good enterprise data management practice says that immediate or close to immediate access to reliable data stores that are valid and trusted is the best thing. The quicker that you can apply deep and rich, meaningful data sciences to systems of records, those core systems that own a record or own data, is the right thing. And it's funny, I see proposals sometimes internal to my shop or out in the TMF world that say, we want to build a data lake, and we want to take all of our data from these core systems and dump them into this big lake. And then we're going to apply some really meaningful data science practices to that data lake. And we're going to get some really good actionable insights and results out of that. That's kind of fundamentally flawed from the very beginning, because the moment you transfer data from a system of record into that data lake, you're one step removed from its natural state, and it immediately starts getting stale. And even if your APIs have data transfers happening in real or near real time, one, it's an expensive proposition, and two, there's still a lag there. And number three, you start to lose trust. And that's key in technology and IT and how you provide best customer service. When you've extracted data away from the system owner, whether it's a CFO for financial data or a Chico for HR data, they immediately lose one level of trust because it's not the data that they built and curated anymore. A good architecture instead has an API-rich layer. I promise I won't go all engineering here, but has a good API layer in the middle where you are instead applying your data science tools, capabilities, and people to direct data sources of record. And they are that business intelligence, data analytics layer is able to introspect or inspect data where it should remain, which is in these systems of record. That's the best architecture. The cloud is a huge enabler of that. And if you build your cloud architectures right, it has that rich API layer there that is pointing to wherever those data sources are, and is extracting those in real time. And so how this helps with the delivery of digital services, one, it maintains trust. with the people who own that data, the people whose job it is to make sure that data is the best that it can be, to curate that data. The other thing is it allows you to rapidly get actionable information to the people who need it to make good executive or business decisions. And they have a level of trust over that data. And it allows them to also see that when that data changes in real time or in near real time, that in and of itself is information that they can use. They can say, why is that data changing? Is there something that I need to be aware of there? And you can inspect that as well, and if that changes your decision calculus when you're looking at that data. So, yeah, the cloud is a great enabler of the best of data sciences that are out there, but that's also extensible to good practice on-prem as well.
Yeah, it's a lot in that response there. Of course, a lot of stakeholders, I would say, in terms of managing all that data and making sure it's not just there, but it's in a state that's usable, that it's hygienic data, that it's clean and structured in such a way that you can actually do something with it. So all good points there. I guess keeping along with the visibility piece of things that the cloud enables. Of course, GSA is more than just 1800 F Street. It's a nationwide enterprise, and you guys, of course, have field offices and a presence throughout the country. How does that cloud infrastructure enable the coordination between those field offices and making sure that their needs are understood and that they're met?
Yeah. So, talk about the need to mobile enable an entire organization. I often say the sun never sets on the GSA enterprise. I have IT people in Europe and I have IT people in South Asia. And, remember, the business mission of the federal government is not just limited to the United States, it's worldwide. And so, if ever there was a need to make sure that we could do the work of GSA from any place at any time on any device, that time presented itself 5 or 6 years ago and remains now. So agency field offices, one of the things that we found when we created that mobile enabled capability for the agency is that it drew field offices that oftentimes felt pretty remote. It drew them into the center of the agency. You used to have to fly out to a field office in California or Washington State or Montana or places like that to have meaningful interactions with people. Starting 4 or 5 years ago and carrying forward to now, you can have somebody in one of those field offices online, their smiling face, talking to them in a moment. And that transforms an organization. Allows us to collaborate in ways that were never possible before. And that has led to many of the good outcomes that you see in my IT shop, but also GSA as an agency. We're able to react and respond to our federal partners in their time, not in our time, not in real time, but in their time. It's promoted a asynchronous work environment, which is unsurprisingly, that's how the citizens we serve live their lives. They don't just reach out to Xfinity to say, I want to add a cable TV on a 9 to 5 schedule. They reach out 24/7 to their cable providers to change stuff. And they rightfully expect that of the government that serves them. In the same way that our federal partners across the federal enterprise, their business mission doesn't end at 5 p.m. East Coast time. It ends when their business mission ends. And because we serve our partners all around the world, we have to be able to work all around the world in that asynchronous work style. The technology enabled us to do that. We're not perfect at it. We're getting better at it. But there's examples where we've changed our delivery style to be, rather than location-based, it's been based on business. What does the business need? And sometimes that means you have people working off hours because they're in a different time zone. Increasingly, it allows us to build a follow the sun work model where we have a core of capability following the sun across the regions and field offices of GSA, serving the rest of GSA. But then that also allows us to have more than just that core, because some of us work better at 11 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock in the morning. So it's allowing us to increasingly tailor the individual worker to the individual work task, based on time, based on demographic. And so it's been pretty exciting. Our field offices, they recognize that. They also do like to see us show up and darken their doorway. And when the pandemic is over, I'm sure we'll be able to do that again as well. But what they've told us is we feel more connected to the services that we consume from your IT shop than we have at any time in our existence. And that's deeply rewarding.
Great to hear. And, keeping up with that, I guess that demand piece of things that, GSA is a around the clock shop and the requests come in around the clock. Let's maybe kind of weave in automation into this conversation. GSAs, of course, been the driving force behind RPA across the federal government. And, when you look at the spectrum of things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, the sky's the limit here when it comes to fielding these types of things. With all that in mind, how do these tools help GSA meet its customer experience goals?
Yeah. So that's an interesting one. I mentioned earlier that the business mission of GSA continues to grow, and that's great. That means our federal partners are realizing some utility, some value out of the services we provide. We can't grow as fast as the demand is growing, and so we are constantly looking at automation and augmentation to help us be able to do that. Part of that is an efficiency play. When you use automation and augmentation, it makes you more efficient. And, we're better stewards of taxpayer dollars when we run more effectively and more efficiently. But part of it is, the demand is just growing. And so we have to try to keep up with that. And that's one of the reasons we lean very heavily into automation and augmentation. We started an initiative a couple of years ago called EOA. It stands for Eliminate, Optimize, and Automate. And it's a classic rationalization play. That's the eliminate part. Optimize, it's more than just putting RPA or some other automation on there. It's taking a look at the underlying business process and say, where can we kill things that deserve killing? Where can we re-engineer the business process where that will yield the best outcome? Or where can we put an automation overlay? We've been doing things like RPA for 20 years now. It's not new. It has a great new cool name, but it's not new. And we do automations of any sort, whether it's RPA or building that API-rich environment underneath, or scripting. We script like crazy. We've handed scripting capabilities down to the individual staff layer. And they can build scripts from day one that they're here that doesn't require authorization or anything like that. We do all the automation plays because it's the right thing to do. These are tools that are ready, available now, and can change the game. And when done right, when done with an eye towards business process re-engineering and killing things that deserve killing, you get really, really great outcomes. On the augmentation side, the business velocity, the business pace here in the 21st century, it is mind-numbing, especially to somebody who's been in the business world for years now. And every indication is that it's going to continue to increase. And while here in government, we have some of the best, most capable public servants that I've ever known, there's more work than there is time. And so having digital versions of ourselves to augment our work, it's the right thing to do. And so we've leaned pretty forward into the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence to meet that business demand. And we've like in classic GSA fashion, we started with MVPs, we started with pilots, we learned how to do things well. We stopped doing the things that didn't produce any real value, doubled down on the things that do produce value. And so in multiple domains, whether it's the acquisition domain or the procurement domain or technology domains or cybersecurity domains, we have some pretty meaningful instances of AI and machine learning going. Now, I'll give you a real classic example. Now, when people call my help desk or they chat my help desk, sometimes they're talking to a person, sometimes they're talking to AI, and they can't really tell the difference. And that's the right way to be, because I have a big help desk. It supports, 15, 20 major enterprise businesses here in GSA. And I just don't want to keep growing that help desk and growing that help desk. Augmentation is a perfect example with that. Same thing when looking out across, people don't realize it, but when they're looking across GSA schedules and looking in GSA Advantage, that their searches are backed up by machine learning and AI, because that's the right thing to do. We can only staff so many help desks. We can only hire so many people, and nor should we just continue to expand the workforce indefinitely if these technologies are available to us. We'll continue to research and implement these techs in support of the mission. We'll continue to share what we learn here through our AI community of practice, our machine learning, our RPA community of practice, because what we found is that an investment in a thing is good. The investment in the thing shared with more is a better thing. And, that's baked into our DNA here at GSA. We'll continue to do that.
All right. And that's a very robust community, the RPA community of practice. A lot of lively discussions there and a lot of, playbooks that have demonstrated how, you say this has been a 20+ year journey, but in the past few years, I feel there's been, some real exponential growth in terms of, making this a standardized practice across the federal government, the fielding of it, the centralization of it, all those good things. So,
right.
Yeah, I changing gears here a little bit. We've been talking so much about, all of the opportunities that are provided with the cloud and all of it enables, but certainly the openness of data, the sharing of data, those are all well and good. But on the flip side of that, there's a tricky balance to strike in terms of, of course, making sure that the data is secure and the people who aren't authorized to have it don't get it. How do you square that circle? That's a particularly tricky thing, optimizing performance, making sure, the data is free flowing where it can be, but at the same time, locking it down where it needs to be locked down.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. And unfortunately, any answer that I give you in this domain immediately becomes stale, because people's thoughts and feelings and opinions about this change on almost an hourly basis. So we try to introduce a bit of agility into our thinking there, keeping our finger on the pulse of what's being talked about in kind of the academic circles and stuff, about emerging trends in data distribution, data security, but also taking a look at what the art of possible is using new and emerging and existing technologies, and also what the people we serve, whether it's the agencies we support or the citizens we serve, what they're demanding of their government. To put a finer point on just how big the challenge is, not everybody has a singular thought about what data should be shared and what should not. I was at an event right before the pandemic with my family, and every age demographic was there, from grandparents' age all the way down to Gen Xers and younger. And I spent a little time talking with all of them to say, what do you think about the sharing of data? And the younger people were saying, just share it all, just share it all. And we want services delivered to us based on who we are. And you have to know who we are to be able to effectively do so. And then on the other end of the spectrum, people were saying, I don't want you to know who I am. I don't want you to know anything about me. If I want services from you, I will come get it. I'll come research it and I'll come get it. And I want you to make it hard for me to get to it, because that means everybody else is going to have a hard time getting to those services as well. And then every opinion in between. And so we as a government, we have the challenge of delivering a government portfolio of services to that wide mindset from the citizens we serve. And it's changed over time. What we think about privacy and data security and data accessibility now is very different than even what we experienced just a couple of years ago. So when I am looking to balance the security of my data and the growing demand for more accessible data across the agency, I'm trying to walk that tightrope at the same time. But I'm not alone. That's why there's communities of practice and academic research, and the entire community is talking about this on a regular basis. At this particular point in time, I spend most of my time, and my executive team spends their time understanding what data we have, and understanding the access and how access needs change and morph over time. We're looking at democratizing and no longer confining data that shouldn't be. If the end result of the data is open data that's pushed out to the citizen, then where the data is stored, why would we close that off as well? Because citizens, when they dig into data, they find some really interesting things that they can help us with. We're finding that things like zero trust architectures are going to be really helpful to this, because that allows us to open and close the gates on data based not only on the value and the risk associated with that data, but the changing personas of people, which literally change in real time based on where they are, what they're doing, what they're asking for, things like that. And we're finding elegant ways to match up those personas of people that are changing, morphing over time, and the data that they should have access to, which changes and morphs over time. It's a profoundly complex environment, but one we're determined to face head on. And this is not just a GSA problem. This is not even a government problem. This is a worldwide problem, both in the commercial and in the private sectors. But there's things like zero trust architecture that are out there that are designed to help with this very thing, that allow the people who are controlling access to data to make those decisions in real time, rather than memorializing something and letting it stand for the next 20 years, even though the entire data world is changing around us. So exciting place to be. We're thinking about it literally every hour of every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, an age-old problem with an evolving response.
Right.
Each day something new, and like you said, it's not a one-size-fits-all for anyone by any means. Changing gears here yet again. Of course, GSA has a much more robust and modernized infrastructure than perhaps some of the other corners of the federal government. But of course, retiring systems is something that I imagine any CIO is got on his mind as part of IT modernization. How does retiring legacy IT fit into your kind of framework of how GSA operates and kind of meets all of the mission requirements that we've been talking about?
Yeah. So it's funny you ask that, Rory. The last meeting I was in, one of the topics that we were discussing was some of the remaining workloads on one of our mainframes. And people are always shocked, like, GSA has a mainframe? We used to have 4, then we had 3, then we had 2. Now we're down to 1, and most of the workloads off on that mainframe have been retired, but there are some workloads still remaining on there. And that begs an interesting question. Some would say, well, you're going to retire those workloads immediately, right? That's the easy answer. I'm not so sure that it's the right answer, because ultimately, as a CIO, I'm responsible for delivering the best technology service to the businesses of GSA at the greatest value. But how you define value and how you deliver against that, there's all sorts of different ways that you can do that. In this case, I have a mainframe that's running that is hyper-converged, that is running at a very cheap cost, And that when I measure the cybersecurity risk, it is just about the least risky device and ecosystem I have in my enterprise. And the user presentation layer has been modernized so that people don't even know they're touching a mainframe. And so when I look at the investment necessary to remove the remaining workloads, um, I see that I would spend money, get no user presentation, no user gains, probably make the cybersecurity posture worse by going out to other architectures, um, and I'd get no material business value out of that. So I ask myself, why would I make that business investment? I'm a CIO that has a fiduciary responsibility to provide the greatest value for the technology investments that we have. Now, cold hard fact is we're working to retire the thing, but it is a very low priority of mine because I have other areas where I can get immediate customer or user experience gains or immediate cybersecurity value or immediate cost savings. So most of my time and attention is focused on those areas, not on the remaining workloads on this mainframe. So that's kind of how we view retiring legacy IT systems. We've done all the easy stuff. We've moved our mail to the cloud. We've moved our back office workflows to the cloud. Heck, we're in our second version of digital transformation on those platforms and those capabilities. We've done all the medium hard stuff. We do transformations at the component level, not just at the system level. I'm transforming databases to the cloud and API backbones to the cloud and zero trust architectures out to the cloud, not just the architectures, but the management of out to the cloud. All that medium stuff, all I'm left is with the hard stuff that has low value. And so I will be very thoughtful about retiring the remaining legacy IT systems that I have because the reason they remain is because they are very high value. And there's no risk. I don't have developer risks, with retiring developers. I don't have cybersecurity risks, things like that. And that's where Cloud Smart comes into play. We were early and frequent adopters of Cloud Smart. And the focus there was move stuff to the cloud where it makes sense, where you can produce value by doing so. Some stuff actually doesn't deserve or demand moving to the cloud. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I may be saying something different. But right now, and I'm here to manage for the next 3-4 years or whatever time scale the next administration priorities are going to be here. They're saying manage to value. And so right now, I view every legacy IT system from a value proposition. And that includes cybersecurity and cost and people and business enablement and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's really that triage of getting to the highest demand things first, and having some things that can be on the back burner, and you get to them, when it makes sense. David, we are getting close to time here, and we've had a pretty robust conversation, to say the least. Is there anything worth bringing up here that I didn't think to ask you about, or is there anything that's a good, strong note you'd like to leave with everyone before we close things out?
So that's the surprise question. Good job. And it sounded very kind of auditor-like. Is there anything that you didn't tell us? That's very good. You could have a second career as an auditor. Well done there. So I guess I'll end with this comment. So I've been a CIO here at GSA for 6 years. It's been very rewarding, actually the most rewarding part of my career. So we're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish here at GSA, and we have a lot more to do. For those of you who are listening to this that might be out in the private sector or in academia or places like that, I'll make an appeal to you specifically. This has been the most rewarding part of my career. The work that we do here matters. I look back at some of the things that we've been able to accomplish at GSA, not only for GSA, but for our partners. And I am so proud of what we've been able to accomplish. We're making purchasing in government more effective. We're literally changing the way that facilities are going to be used right before our very eyes in response to the pandemic for the largest property manager in the world, the US federal government. We're doing design and construction different. We're deploying technology different. And this is all in places that affect the people in our lives, our friends, our family, the people in our communities and stuff like that, because we're the government and we impact those people. And so my appeal to any of you who might be listening to this, consider a stint in public service. It's been the most rewarding thing, part of my career. It very well may be the same for you. It is not often that you can do work at scale that matters to the people that you care about. This is one of the places that you can do it. So join us. You won't regret it.
Certainly a powerful note to end on. I'd like to thank today's guest, David Shive, the Chief Information Officer for the General Services Administration. I'm your moderator, Jory Heckman, and you're listening to the Federal News Network. Now, let me send you back to the studio for more on the Cloud Exchange.